שלום לכולם, שמי טל שקד קרטלה ואני מנהלת מיזם התפוצות יונייטד. מיזם משותף של משרד התפוצות, משרד החינוך, מתח ושותפים פילנטרופיים וחינוכיים מכל העולם, שמטרתו חיזוק בתי הספר היהודיים בתפוצות. דמיינו לעצמכם מנהל בית ספר יהודי באתונה, מנהלת בהלסינקי, מנהל בריו או מנהלת בית ספר יהודי באורוגוואי. עכשיו תשאלו את עצמכם, מי מפתח עבורם את תוכניות לימודי היהדות? מי מכשיר את המורים ללימודי עברית ויהדות? עם מי מתייעץ מנהל בית הספר בשאלות שנוגעות לתוכנית הלימודים, לפדגוגיה, לתהליכים חינוכיים להקניית זהות יהודית? אל מי הוא פונה לבקש עזרה בעיתות משבר? על רקע הזה, מתוך תחושת מחויבות עמוקה לחינוך היהודי, שהוא הבסיס לעתידן של הקהילות היהודיות בתפוצות, הקימה מדינת ישראל את יונייטד. רשת חינוך יהודי גלובלית, שמטרתה להפיג את בדידותו של המנהל, לייצר פלטפורמות שיח ושיתוף בין מחנכים, ולסייע לבתי הספר היהודיים בתפוצות להתמודד עם האתגרים העומדים לפתחם. בפאנל שלנו נעסוק באתגרי מערכת החינוך בכל העולם על רקע משבר הקורונה. אני מבקשת להביא בפניכם בדברי הפתיחה שלי את הפרספקטיבה הייחודית של בתי הספר היהודיים בתפוצות, ולשתף אתכם באתגרים ובהזדמנויות שהולידה התקופה האחרונה. השפעת המגפה על בתי הספר היהודיים הייתה מאוד שונה בין מדינה למדינה ובין קהילה לקהילה. עבדנו עם קהילות שבהם הייתה פגיעה פיזית ממשית של הנגיף במנהיגות בתי הספר, מה שכמעט שיתק את בתי הספר ופגע קשות במורל וביכולת להוביל שינוי. התמיכה שניתנה לבתי הספר הללו התמקדה בהיבטים הרגשיים ובמתן כלים להתמודד עם מצבי משבר. עבדנו גם עם בתי ספר בארגנטינה למשל, שנפגעו בצורה קשה מהמשבר הכלכלי, שהרי בתי הספר היהודיים הינם בתי ספר פרטיים המבוססים על שכר לימוד גבוה ופילנטרופיה. כאן התמקדה העבודה המשותפת ביצירת מודלים כלכליים חדשים ויצירתיים להמשך תפקודו של בית הספר בעת משבר כלכלי. פגשנו גם בתי ספר בצרפת למשל, שבהם כמעט ואין תשתית טכנולוגית, מורים ותלמידים ללא מחשבים, תשתיות אינטרנט רעועות ואוריינות דיגיטלית נמוכה של המורים. עבור בתי הספר מן הסוג הזה, הקימה יונייטד מרכז חירום לתמיכה במורים. במסגרתו הכשרנו מאות מורים בשפות שונות, והמורים הללו קיבלו כלים דיגיטליים ופדגוגיים להוראה מרחוק, תוך מינוף החדשנות של מתח. מאידך, פגשנו בתי ספר שתוך זמן קצר הצליחו לבנות מערכת למידה מרחוק, יצירתיות וחדשנות, המפיקות ערך אדיר עבור התלמידים ומשפחותיהם. את ה-best practices של אותם בתי ספר הנגשנו לבתי הספר באזורים אחרים, מתוך הבנה שבעת הזו אין מקור ידע מוסמך. כולם עסוקים בניסוי וטהייה, והדרך הטובה ביותר להתקדם היא לשתף בסיפורי הצלחה. תופעה מעניינת נוספת מתרחשת בארצות הברית. מרבית בתי הספר הציבוריים בארצות הברית לומדים כיום באונליין. בתי הספר היהודים הפרטיים לעומת זאת הצליחו להשיג אישורים לפתיחת בתי הספר ללמידה פנים אל פנים. הדבר הוליד שתי התפתחויות מעניינות וחיוביות. אחת, הורים רבים שבוחרים להעביר את ילדיהם מבתי הספר הציבוריים לבתי הספר היהודיים. השנייה, בשל החיוב ללמד בקפסולות קטנות, נוצר מחסור במורים באותם בתי ספר. בתי הספר נאלצו לגייס בזמן קצר צוותי הוראה חדשים. זהו אתגר אדיר, אך הוא טומן בחובו הזדמנות גדולה להכניס כוחות חדשים ורעננים אל תוך המערכת, בתקווה שישארו גם ביום שאחרי. פתרון נוסף לבעיית המחסור במורים הוא הקמת קמפוס וירטואלי שפורץ את הגבולות הגיאוגרפיים, ומאפשר למורים הטובים ביותר ללמד בכל מקום ובכל זמן. כך הקמנו ביונייטד פיילוט לקמפוס וירטואלי, שבו מלמדות בנות שירות לאומי מאות ילדים מכל רחבי העולם. שאלה מרתקת שמעסיקה את כל בתי הספר היהודיים שעימם אנו עובדים, הינה האם וכיצד לייצר זהות אונליין. כיצד מייצרים חוויה יהודית. בתי הספר היהודיים אמונים על יצירת תחושת שייכות, קהילתיות, התנסות בריטואלים, בתפילה ושאר חוויות רגשיות שבונות זהות. הקורונה אילצה את מנהלי בתי הספר לזקק את מטרת בית הספר היהודי. אנו רואים בהרבה מאוד בתי ספר ויתור על מרכיבי הידע והשינון, ומתן דגש מאוד מרכזי על החוויה, על לוח השנה העברי ועל המרכיב הערכי. יותר מכל, נדמה לי שהקורונה חיזקה את מעמדו של בית הספר בתוך הקהילה. אם עד לפני 8 חודשים למדו בבית הספר רק הילדים, הרי שכיום לומדים בו גם ההורים ולעיתים גם הסבים והסבתות. בין אם במעבר מקרי ברקע של המסך, ובין אם בהשתתפות פעילה בקבלת שבת, הכנה לחגים וכן הלאה. מדובר בשינוי מאוד משמעותי בתפקידו של בית הספר בתוך הקהילה היהודית, ואני מעריכה שתהיינה לו השפעות גם ביום שאחרי. אני רוצה לסיים בדבריהם של 2 דמויות מופת שעבדו לעולם היהודי בשבוע האחרון. הן דמויות שונות מאוד זו מזו, אך תרומתן לעולם אדירה. המשורר נתן זך לימד אותנו שלא טוב היות האדם לבדו, ושכולנו זקוקים לחסד. הרב ג'ונתן זקס לימד אותנו ש-we all share collective responsibility for our collective future. נדמה לי שלשלושת היסודות הללו, קהילה, חסד ואחריות קולקטיבית לעתידנו, הם הבסיס לחינוך יהודי ולהמשכיותו.
Hello and welcome to מקור ראשון and YBA's Online Education Summit. First, I would like to present and introduce our participants. Hello to Professor ANdrias שלייכר, who is Director for Education and Skills at the OECD. Hello. And Mrs.
Shalom.
Hello. Shalom. And Mrs. Jan Mourisson, founder and senior partner in TIE's organization, which creates STEM ecosystems in the US and around the globe. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello. Good to be here.
Good. Today we're going to talk about how coronavirus has influenced education around the world. Professor שלייכר, you've been working over 20 years with ministers and leaders around the world. Former U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan has said, and I quote, that you understand global issues and challenges better than anyone has ever met before. Well, there is no greater worldwide challenge than COVID. So first of all, I would like to hear from you about how you dealt with the virus at the beginning of the outbreak. At what point did schools shut down and what was the public response to it?
Well, it depends where you look. There are countries like Sweden that never shut their schools down. They shut down everything else before they touched the school because they knew that our schools today will be our society tomorrow. And there are other countries, like the country where I live in, France, that shut down schools very quickly. The reactions have been quite different. Well, it's also encouraging now that, many school systems have actually learn to live, to coexist with this virus. Basically, while the virus is still around, schools have been redesigned to be safe places. Hybrid learning has emerged, so sort of to integrate the virtual world and the world of learning in school. I think actually there are many very interesting solutions. You're quite right, COVID is perhaps the biggest challenge of our times at this moment, but we've also seen a lot of, technological and social innovation in education that makes me hopeful. We have seen perhaps less reform in these days, but more change.
And what was the public response?
Well, that varies. I think it depends a lot on the capacity of school systems to generate trust. Mm-hmm. And trust comes with transparency, where you have education systems that actually, had clear strategies of how they deal with health, how they introduce social distancing requirements in schools, how they deal with space constraints, and where teachers were very good in explaining this, where you have a lot of frontline capacities, active teachers, active school leaders who reach out to parents, who reach out to families, and who build that confidence. Actually, the public response has been very good. But you look to a country like Chile that has actually a very cautious approach to reopening schools, and the public is very distrustful. They don't feel actually that this is sort of safe for my own child. So I think actually that is the critical kind of part. To what extent do we succeed to build in a transparent environment that brings people along, teachers, parents, and last but not least, students.
Can you give us an example of a country that succeeded in online learning, that you can think of a great success?
Well, obviously, you look to the countries in Asia, whether it's China or Singapore, Korea, that have actually had also very nuanced strategies, that they were technically quite well advanced before COVID struck, and they had enough frontline capacity actually to to actually deploy technology. You look to, and so I think these are very successful examples. Estonia in Europe would be another case. The Netherlands, to some parts of Germany where things have worked really well. So you do find, I think, quite good examples where technology is changing the way students learn, teachers teach, and schools operate. But the biggest part is not the technology. The technology is only as good as it's actually being used. And so I think the human capacity in schools, the way in which teachers have been prepared, that is perhaps the most decisive part. And where teachers are not ready, technology is not doing that much for you these days. But again, I think we can look at enough good examples to show that this can be done.
Yes. And Jan, what about the situation in America? We've seen them close down at the beginning, and then after summer ended, President Trump rushed to open. What can you tell us about that?
Well, thanks for asking, and I think it's exactly the way Professor שלייכר has said. In America, from the beginning, the states were in charge. Whether or not the rhetoric in the public view was coming from the federal government, the reality was that it was the governor's decision. So we have 50 states in America, so it's like having 50 countries making decisions. What happened, however, which was very gratifying, was governors from the beginning, called each other. And they spoke about regionally how they were going to handle it, because they were connected by roads, connected by airports that were common, and common families as well, with large populations that reached between and among. So that was the beginning as well. The other thing immediately was that the superintendents, who are the head of the school districts, and remember, we have over 14,000 school districts in America, the superintendents started to call each other as well. And their trade organizations got involved, and we're talking about within a week. But within that week, on to the second week, America closed, one after another, and started to relegate to a remote environment, which took a while to happen. But immediately what we saw, and this happened just on the cusp of the close, was to understand that we had no capacity, either in hardware or in software, to bring a remote education to everybody's living room and home and house. And it immediately questioned who had that capacity and who did not. So the success immediately was about what systems existed in our cities, in our rural areas, in order to, number one, deal with the fact that we didn't have the infrastructure. And second was to understand the need on a very granular level. So what was really interesting, to tell you the truth, what was really interesting was that the infrastructure that was there were the STEM ecosystems. It was the ecosystems that were cross-sector. They worked with businesses. They had the relationships. And in a moment's notice, they became really valuable. So
that leads me to my next question, Mrs. Morisohn. Among other things, you're a 35-year veteran teacher and principal.
Right.
Way to go. How well prepared were the teachers in shifting to digital remote learning, and what do you think can be done about it? Especially, I'm interested to hear about what STEM ecosystems have to offer in that regard. Israelis are not very familiar with the term STEM, so let me just explain. It stands for the initials science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So,
correct. Yes, and let me just say, you're absolutely right. Israelis think STEM as physics, mathematics, and English. In America and across the globe, we have a broader context, but that's changing in Israel. But that's not the question.
Thanks to you.
The question here, what is the teachers? Our teachers, we found a generational divide, and it has not been spoken about in probably the detail that it might be. Those who are digital natives came in to the question and to the challenge, raising this as a challenge and as an opportunity. Those who whose long careers in teaching spanned the ability to gain that knowledge rather than come in with that knowledge when they began their careers, found this as a real challenge. And yet everybody's in the classroom together, in the schools together. What was found immediately was those who were more comfortable really went to help those who weren't. And teaming began to happen, even from living rooms, from back porches, wherever it happened, where there were relationships. Relationships mattered. So as much as it would have been wonderful for all of our teachers in America to be armed and ready, what they were armed with was the ability to be a team with each other. And that has helped in a huge way, but not enough. It really exposed a lot of gaps.
I see. And what about you, Professor שלייכר? Was the human resource also the main the thing that made the difference? How did you experience it?
Absolutely. I think what this crisis tells us is that education is not a transactional experience, where you broadcast knowledge. It's always a relational experience. Mm-hmm. Now, I think what, students are going to remember 10 years from now from this crisis is who were the teachers who reached out to them, who understood their dreams and passions, who were able to engage with them. Who were the teachers who understood how students learn differently and embrace that diversity with, differentiated pedagogical practice. Now, technology is another example. You can look to Israel, it's the high-tech country in the world. Nobody would compete with that country, in the technological innovation. But you look at your schools, you have about just at best half of the teachers feeling comfortable with technology. Mm-hmm. And that's something not untypical. I think that's the picture that we have. And I think it will take a long time. And it's not just about, adopting technology. The key is really, how do you make teachers the designers of those technologies? Now, that as a teacher in this COVID pandemic, is not good enough to be a great instructor. You have to be a great coach. You have to be a great mentor. You have to be a great facilitator. And you have to be a very, very innovative designer of completely new learning environments. And I think that's what many teachers find a hard time with. We have a very industrial culture in education, where we teach teachers exactly what to teach and how to teach, and we leave them alone in the classroom. And Jen made that point really well. It is about a professional autonomy in a collaborative culture. In this crisis, as a school leader, don't ask yourself, whether people follow your instructions. Mm-hmm. Ask yourself, how well can your teachers actually collaborate? Where you do see that collaborative culture, and again, the Asian countries are far ahead of our Western countries in the sense that
they're also very experienced.
Right.
Yeah, I think they're experienced, but they have a collaborative tradition.
Yes.
In a sense that they are willing to engage with each other.
Do you have something to add, Mrs. Mourison, or
because you nodded? I think that the other thing that I want to add here is that we are all speaking about the digital nature of learning and of engagement, of teaching and learning. The digital nature is a wide expanse. Initially in America, what we saw was broadcasting the classroom. It was not remote learning. Yes. It wasn't even digital learning in what the best sense could be, either from other countries or even from our own country. Instead, what we did is to try to make what we knew and loved and cherished and felt comfortable with presented on a screen to children. And fast, we understood that the curricula that we do have, let alone the teaching methodologies, are not there. So what we did was just to push it in. Since then, we have had the development of what I would call genuine remote opportunities. Genuine hybrid opportunities. Let me give you an example. The Amgen Corporation that had been working with Harvard edX to develop something called Lab Exchange, fast-tracked it. So now we are capable of actually having real chemistry labs and with simulations, animations in the living rooms with the children.
That's amazing.
And across the country in multiple grade levels in authentic ways. There's something that came as it was already on its way and it fast-tracked. Mm-hmm. And that corporation that wasn't going to provide that to the nation as part of their as a global opportunity is now. And in fact is in talk about with Israel and with all 50 states in providing for this. So the inventions that have come from that are really important, but I think it's really important to understand that we cannot use that wide swath of, quote, digital education any longer. It doesn't serve.
Yes, I agree. There is a lot of criticism in Israel regarding the decision-making process. It's been said that the people who determine whether schools will be open or shut down care only about the economy and health issues and are not concerned with education or the children's psychological well-being. How is this issue dealt with abroad, and do you have any advice to give us?
You know, I think that's true in many countries, I think, and that's probably reflecting the reality quite well. You know, we were very quick to shut down schools when the crisis struck. You know, we turned off schools, but we kept restaurants and bars and cinemas open. Now, that's not a good sign of how we weigh the future versus the present. And I think often you can say that education is often more organized around the interests of adults than on the interests of really learners and learning. But I think actually now we are seeing also many good examples. I think the first part of the crisis is over. And as you can see, even now, you know, in Europe where COVID is quite, prevalent, schools have been reopened and schools are operating and schools and teachers are present. So I think actually we've learned from that very first wake, and I do believe, you know, this is about how our societies make trade-offs between the future and the present.
But is it reopening because they want the parents to have like a babysitting, place for the kids, or because they understand the importance of having the kids come to school and, see the teacher, meet the kids?
I think it's the latter, really. I think, we have seen in the first wake of the crisis the steep price that young people have paid who were excluded from schooling. Not sort of, students who had learned how to learn, who were able to manage their learning, access to great technology. For them, that's not been so bad experience. But I think the many young children who had, been spoon-fed by their teachers, who may not have learned schooling in their first week, they have suffered very, very badly. And I think that's now become very, very obvious, So I do think it's a concern for the well-being of children, not just their, academic learning. I think we see the kind of broader social picture much better now. And I think it's got home to parents, to everyone.
Mrs. Mourisson, do you have something to add?
Sure, I do, because the United States is a different story. The United States, we are full of cities and rural environments that are very poverty-stricken, and in some of the cities worse than they've ever been, actually, when you start looking at the demographics. Keeping the children home means that those parents are unable to work. Yet, we all in America want the best for the children, and being with their peers, being with their teachers, and their social emotional development. And we need to talk about that out loud in all education now. The social emotional, not just the learning, but the development is critical. When we actually thought about the system that needed to be in place, we needed to be able to get our parents to work. We needed to be able to get our children to school and everybody safe. What many of the cities have done is that they have created spaces that are wide open, bigger spaces than the schools themselves, like the YMCAs that have the recreation centers, in which children can have other children with them safer than in their schools. And the meantime, their parents can work. This has taken on throughout our country. Cleveland is a perfect example of it, where more than 18,000 spaces for children were found as of September, so their parents can work.
Wow. And
so that they can be with other children and to be in school. And that continues. And that has been safe for everybody. And it takes care of, in a great deal of way, of the social emotional development and learning, but it also pays attention to the need for school to be actually in motion and parents to be in their businesses. But I want to also talk about the high schools for a moment. High school is an entirely different set of circumstances. We talk about school again as K-12, and the early grades are not the same as the late grades. What we found in America in the spring was that our 16 to 18-year-olds in the cities and rural were not in front of the screens in their houses. They were working because their parents were laid off. And what we have found to do is to bring them home in front of their computers and give them the opportunity to earn money by helping businesses in their own town, in their own area, get online. And they have now become partners in what's called Wired. And in Wired, our children, our high school children, are now best friends and colleagues of businesses and are being paid for this.
Wow.
So they don't have to go out to work. And that was the mother of invention. That's something that was invented as a result of this and is now being funded.
I know that both of you care a lot about equality and equity in education and act to improve them. COVID has definitely, like we said before, broadened the gaps between students due to online learning, access to computers, like you mentioned, lack of parental guidance. How do you cope with the situation? You mentioned what you just said, but do you have other examples?
Yeah, you can say that children are the ones least vulnerable to the coronavirus, but they have been the ones most affected by the public policy responses to this virus. So I think, the technology gap is becoming very visible. The human relations gap is very visible. I think this crisis has not created inequalities, but it has grossly amplified them. I think Jen has given us a great example of what we can do to counter this, giving young people a role. I also think there's a lot we can do to better align resources with needs. I think that's often, in normal times, we don't think very much about it. In this COVID times, that is crucially important. How do you attract the most talented teachers to the most challenging classrooms? How you align resources with needs? And I do believe that also there, technology can make such a difference. Technology can make learning so much more granular, so much more interactive, so much more responsive to special needs. Now we have, I think, a golden opportunity really to actually ensure that we get out of the inequitable status quo. It's not enough to just bring us back to where we started. That wasn't good. We need to actually get beyond this and to create, understand that people are different, that they learn differently, and create an education system that is far more responsive to the needs of different kind of learners. And I think actually this crisis has brought us further towards this because it's created awareness of what our current education systems have brought us to.
Mrs. Mourisson?
Yeah, and I would agree 1,000 times with that. The inequities were there. The fact that they are now, they're out in the open, and there's nothing to deny that what there is. Now we have the opportunity to begin to design the future and redesign education. In America, all 50 states in this spring and in the early summer created redesigned programs, actually blueprints, that they're now using and iterating and reiterating, so that they have some roadmap of what it means to be redesigned. And many of them are in contact with each other, which wasn't the case prior to this. The cities are the same thing. When you look at Philadelphia, when you look at LA, when you look at San Francisco's redesign education blueprints, it's a beautiful thing. And equity is straight on the top and throughout and pervasive in this. But I want to mention something that I think we have to say out loud. There is no question that fear is an issue in all of this. We fear the virus. We fear the fact that there's no norm. We don't know, and initially we didn't know who to listen to, who to believe. There are trusted institutions were saying different things to us, which is always a problem. Trust and respect gave way to a lot of fear. But that fear is also as a result of the lack of understanding of the science. It is absolutely monumental how little our populace globally, but in the United States, understands the basic science of which we are now living. If you tap the average person on the shoulder as they walk down the street and you ask them what a virus is, They'll tell you we're in the COVID virus, or they'll talk about a cold, but they will not be able to speak about it with the kind of feeling and comfort that leads you from fear to action. And I think that's something that right now we have to fix. Science is under siege, and that's all there is to it. We have to change that.
Yes. I think you'll both agree with me that hope is a crucial ingredient in education. So I would like to end with a bit of optimism. What opportunities do you think lie ahead for education systems in this unique time, and how will it affect the future?
You know, it's not just hope. I think it's confidence. I do think that this education crisis has shown us actually that that we can see empowerment. You know, we can see where you have, you know, teachers taking things into their hand, schools taking things into their hand, communities taking things into their hand. Things can change. You know, I think we have, if you look at the last 15 years, we've seen a trend towards, you know, what I would call commodification of education. Students became consumers, parents became clients, teachers became service providers, and everybody moved away, apart from each other. I think this crisis has really brought people together. Parents, you know, have seen what it takes to educate a child.
As a mother of 5, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, you know, that's I think really, really good that actually education is becoming a whole of society project, and I think that's what it takes to move things forward.
Mrs. Mourisohn?
I would agree, and I want to add that what we have found is that education is everybody's responsibility and everybody's joy. It isn't something that has to happen 9 to 5, Monday through Friday in America. It happens as families grow and they become closer together and that they live together. The education has always been there that way, but to Andreas's point, it's been commodified. I think that's a great term. We have to take it out of that. But that's not just education K-12. That's also in higher education. And one of the real positives out of this is the fact that we're looking at our testing. We are not thinking that testing is the best thing because, and then fill in the blank at the end. Instead, we are saying, wait a minute, SATs, ACTs, APs, let's not do that right now. We don't know that it's legitimate and good for the children or for the disciplines either. What if we have a different system? And the National Science Foundation awarded in September, last September, the STEM Push Network, which is to create a new system of admission for universities.
Amazing.
So it was going to take 5 years, and now it's not going to take 5 years, because that's the kind of innovation that's necessary out of this. The other piece is, and I would leave you with this, is that we do not in America talk about social mobility. We talk about people living in poverty, and we talk about our neighborhoods as being different. Right now, we are all a single community. We are a community together in our country, divided by state, geographics by states, but not by how we live. Social mobility is critical. Everybody needs the chance. It's everybody's world. And the next great discovery is, and the person or group of people who are going to bring that are some 10-year-olds that are sitting in Omaha or in Clarksdale, Mississippi. They are the same. They should have the opportunities.
Wow, that's beautiful. And in that note, I want to thank you again, Professor שלייכר and Mrs. Mourisohn. It's been a pleasure having you here, and I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. And bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.